it's, there's a lot of that devil stuff in it, but there's a death. I heard something that I really loved. When you come to those big changes, you have one of two options. Either the whole of you is going to die if you keep going on, or the part of you that is sabotaging your potential has to die. Something has to die, because growth and death are the same thing. And it hurts to pick parts of yourself and kill them off, but it's healthier to prune the plant than to uproot the whole thing or let it wither and die on its own because it's going in a direction that is unsustainable.
I get it, and I agree 100%, and it's excellent information. But there's still something that is fundamentally animalistic about change, and I think that it's just fear.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like it's like, because we can intellectualize the reasons why, and they're valid and they're accurate, but it's like a kid standing at the edge of a pool with his father in the pool, and it's his first time jumping in the water.
Mm-hmm.
And this coaching that goes on, this reassuring, and the father can do everything that he needs to do, promise to catch, promise not to let go. All of the reassurance can happen, but at the end of the day, there comes a point where the kid just has to take a chance.
Yeah, there's something I love about, if someone, let's say you have a friend, and your friend's a vampire, and the vampire says, I can make you a vampire, and you know everything you can know cognitively about what it means to be a vampire. You're going to not go in the sun, you're going to drink blood, and you're immortal, and whatever. Maybe you're a little sexier, but there are aspects of being a vampire that you can't know until you've lived it.
Correct.
And that's the fear. It's what do I not know? It's not what are you telling me? It's what do I still not know that I can't know without going into it, because there's no reversing.
I think that's half of it. You know what I think the other half is? I think the other half is letting go of being human.
Yeah, because that is a tie in the physical world, and that's our easiest point of access is the physical world.
And that's also your reality.
Yeah. It's the least important, but the most visceral. It's the thing that we have the easiest time coming back to, but it's really just, all the world's a stage kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. I think this brings us to the point, because there's a language for addiction that needs to be understood by anyone in this field, and that's why addicts have such a better percentage of success with other addicts, because the language of addiction, loneliness, despair, heartache, struggle, that has to be understood. And then there's also the language of recovery. And if you're well versed in both, then you hold the credentials to be able to speak on both topics because they're connected. I'll give you an example. I think about this topic all the time, about addiction and recovery, because that's what I do. And I was in my daughter's room, and I had the fan on in her bedroom, but I wasn't getting any air coming down. I realized that the fan can go two ways, right? One is to pull air up, and the other is to push air down. So I knew it was on the setting that it was pulling air up. So I pressed the reverse button on the remote control, and the fan started to slow down. It slowed down, and then it came to a stop. And then it began to turn the other way, and I thought, that's how change is. That stop is fucking terrifying for people, because not only are you going into the unknown with spinning the other way, which you're not familiar with whatsoever, but you're also letting go of what you are familiar with.
Right.
So you're in no man's land, and being familiar with something that's killing you is still more comfortable than being unfamiliar with something that will save you.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's what I've found with everything that I have a hard time giving up. It's, again, devil, I go to spots where I'm like, okay, this is awful, but I know how to deal with it, at least in the short term. I know what to expect from it. I know the cycles of it. And that's the familiarity.
Yeah, and it's powerful.
It is powerful. There's a huge amount of learning that's been invested in it.
Yeah, and this is after the substances have stopped, right? And this is why people don't understand, especially family members, parents or spouses or siblings. They're like, well, Johnny's been clean for 60 days. Why did he relapse again?
Mm-hmm.
Because Johnny needs to change.
Right.
And we get clean and sober so we can change. If you just get clean and sober and you don't change, you're not going to stay clean and sober. So there are little things and there are big things in our recovery that need to be worked on and need to be changed. Obviously we start with the little stuff because they're easier to do, but the big stuff like patterns and behaviors and belief systems are so deeply ingrained in us. I mean, I think it's harder to change than it is to put away the substances.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like the substances, yeah, they're hard, and both the substances and the personal changes that we need to make, they have their own seasons, mm-hmm. right? Like I could have never got clean until I got to the point where I wanted to get clean. But the change, I've been clean for over 31 years, but I still have stuff that I need to change that I've been looking at for the last 10 years. 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? I got 31 years clean, and for the last 10 years, I'm still looking at things, and it looks back at me, and we nod at each other, we acknowledge each other, and I think for me, the only way that change can happen, or that acceleration of coming to that point, is by spiritual growth.
Absolutely. That spiritual aspect was the thing that I was missing my whole life. I mean, I've been sober. My sobriety date is March 17th of last year, so over a year now.
Congratulations. It's a big deal.
Thank you. And I can say this is my first sobriety date, but I can only say that in the context of this is my first time trying to get sober through a program.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 decades leading up to that, every morning was my next sobriety date. I went to bed saying, I'm never going to do this again. And I woke up and I did it again. And I got relief when I found a different substance to get me off of the previous one I was trying to stop.
Mm-hmm. The lesser of two evils.
The lesser of two evils. And then I'd have that euphoria. I found the solution. Now all that, the restless, irritable discontent, it's out the window because for this time I don't have a tolerance and I do have an answer. And then I'm back in the same pattern. Now I got to stop this. And that could be anything. It was frequently substance. It could have been men. It could have been shopping. It could have been sugar. It was always something. It was never not something.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I didn't understand that addiction was the problem because I had a littered past of things I'd given up. So I could tell myself, oh, I get over stuff. I can put it away. But in the process of that, because I knew there was something deeply wrong, I was constantly looking for solutions. So I'd try hypnosis, I'd try Burning Man, I'd try reading self-help books, I'd try meditating, do all this stuff. But the primary piece I was missing was the firsthand and deep experience with the spiritual itself.
And what do you think that looks like? What's your See, I believe that there's a yearning.
There is.
There's a yearning, there's a longing in every human being. If they're conscious and honest enough, there is a unfulfilled desire, a search, a seeking for something that we can't see or touch.
Yeah.
And I think that needs to be really pinpointed and identified. I think it's a calling. It's a maybe that we voice in us something that's calling us back home. And I believe that you can go back home and still be on this planet
Yeah.
as a human being, because we're part human and part being. I just don't think there's enough attention being put on the being aspect of who we are.
I think it's an instinctual drive, the same way animals instinctually know where to go but can't tell you why, and can't, relate to themselves why they know what to do. I think it's an instinctual drive, and with instinctual drives there's an evolutionary reason for it, and there's an inferential biology aspect. The fact that humans, once they discover their God, will put even their own life before it, will put their children's lives before it, like in the mythology of Abraham. The instinct is universal. It does not change from culture to culture, from race to race, from timeline to timeline. We have all had it. We've always had it. It has inspired wars. It's inspired everything, top to bottom. If there wasn't a true and real reason for it, it wouldn't be in us.
There's no question. But then why do some people hear it and either get tortured and haunted by it because they can't achieve it? And then why do some people actually adhere to it, achieve it, and live a blissful life? And then some people, seems like they're not even aware. They don't even hear it. They don't hear the call. It's interesting.
I think they don't hear the call yet. And I think people who are tortured by it don't recognize it for what it is.
True.
And then that's where you start filling that drive with something else that gives you momentary quiet from it. I know for me that I was raised in a mega church. I was 7 days a week in a church, in a religious family. I don't think until you're about 12 years old you have the ability to experience the spiritual in a firsthand way, in a way that you can articulate. I think there's something to that. God was presented literally to me, and the literal presentation was ridiculous, and I dismissed it, despite having all the education on what God was in a Judeo-Christian sense. And then I went to college and started with philosophy as a major, which was useless but interesting. And that's when we really started diving into, is there God, is there not God, our morals, is morality subjective, objective, what is it? And I can look back now and I can see that at the time I needed an answer, and I needed an answer that fitted what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do needed no God. And so I was able to dismiss God, but I was able to dismiss the idea of God and of the spiritual because I was able to make it so small that it was dismissible.
From a scale of 1 to 10, how honest would you say in that time were you with yourself?
I was deeply dishonest with myself.
Okay. So it wasn't just a matter of being ignorant to the truth. There was actual willful dishonesty, because they're two different things. You can be ignorant and not be dishonest.
Yeah.
And I don't mean ignorant in a disrespectful manner.
No,
I mean it in the literary term.
For me, I was such a ball of need, and the way I wanted to meet those needs conflicted with my understanding.
So it was a survival mechanism.
It was a survival
Gotcha.
thing.
So it wasn't a conscious happening. It was more
it was
survival.
I need to go after what I need to go after. You can't tell me in a way that I can get on board with morally why I can't do that.
Yeah, you missed that train. You know, as parents, I wish what parents would do, which is what I did. I spoke to my children about the fact that there absolutely is a greater power at work. And I wish more parents would lay that out. So, because at a very early age, you can define the need to connect with something higher than yourself, but don't put in your own definition of what it is for the child.
Right.
Children are naturally seekers and explorers and wanderers. Let them do that for themselves.
Yeah.
We don't need to put a name on this power that is greater than ourselves. We just need to connect to it. And I think one of the mistakes people make is parents make is that they download the information that they have and expect their children to adopt these things without even giving them a chance to explore. And you know what I
Right.
mean?
And I think by giving definable physical characteristics or at least something that can be articulated as a characteristic to a higher power, you start giving the person hearing it pieces to chip at. And I think ultimately, every spiritual tradition, they kind of end up in the same spot when you push back. And in fact, the Judeo-Christian one's interesting because it's one of the only ones that doesn't ultimately say that the idea of God is a mask for the great spiritual energetic force that is one, right? It ends with God. Whereas others ultimately come back and they're like, these are characteristics, these various deities are characteristics of a higher power, but ultimately that's even a mask, and you pull it back and you're just face to face with the life force. I was able to dismiss God easily because the way God was defined was ridiculous, and the various tenets of what God was were antagonistic to each other. And when you don't want it already, and then someone's giving you something that you can argue with, it's a lot easier to get to know God than if you've never been given a piece to chip at in the first place, and you just understand there's a magnetism that you're pulled to, and you'll know it when you feel it because you'll be searching for something
Correct.
inside yourself because the outside stuff is no longer fulfilling it.
Correct. And let's define what I mean when I use the word God. I'm talking about the source of creation.
Right.
I'm because you can give different names. My sponsor always says, he goes, my name is Tony, but I have several names. Some people call me dad, some people call me uncle, some people call me grandfather, but we're talking about the same person.
Right.
Right. So when we use the word God, I just want our audience to know what we're talking about is the source of creation. And I don't believe anybody can know what that is. And I don't think it's important to be able to define it.
Right.
It's undefinable.
Yeah.
But
defining
you don't.
it is limiting.
Yeah, it's very limiting, and it's based on human understanding. Now, let's tie this in with how this comes into addiction and recovery, because regardless of which 12-step program you go into, God is a big deal. Like having a higher power, which to me, in essence, is just telling the individual that you're not God.
Right.
That's a huge start for people that have been for addicts or alcoholics that have been running amok all their life in a very selfish way with no care or concern for family members, spouses, children. So they are in essence playing God in their own lives. Now, you do have the right to do whatever you want in your life, but that doesn't make you God. So the dumbing down, the shrinking of the I, and giving taking a back seat to a greater, higher power, God, I think is one of the main deflating aspects of what the step work is about. Now, let's take, for example, and as we do this podcast today, like whatever you're comfortable talking about, Kimberly, is beautiful. Whatever you're not, feel free to say you're not. You and I are friends. We've actually done some spiritual work together. And so knowing, because you're very prolific in your descriptions and in your views and in your accounts of a higher power. You're a very intelligent woman, obviously, and I believe to a certain extent I'm an intelligent man. But when it comes to my own life and the stuff I've been fighting for 10 years, somehow my intelligence doesn't measure up with my actions. So what's one thing that you would say you're really struggling with right now, and all the intelligence and the insight that you have is just head knowledge, and it doesn't hit, the tires don't hit the street, you know what I mean? So, because there's a gap there.
Yeah, there's always a gap.
And that's a fascinating gap, especially for someone who's super intelligent like you. So what's happening there? What's something that you're dealing with that you're comfortable talking about, that you're having a difficulty of changing or letting go?
So, as I've talked to you about, the thing that, and this goes back my whole life. I can see that's been pointed out. I've been in a relationship for a very long time. And that relationship, I can see very clearly, was meeting the God need for me for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can also see how when it stopped meeting the God need, that's when I really doubled down on substance to fill it in, because I couldn't walk away from it.
That's interesting that you say it was filling a God need, but it can't possibly have the possibilities of a God relationship.
No, it had zero of that, but that immediate need, I think we're all ultimately looking for something to submit to. Something.
Okay, can I stop you for a second? That's a phenomenal statement. I think what makes the difference, because you're right, we are all searching for something to connect to submit to, call it what you will. But I think what is absolutely imperative is, are we doing it consciously or are we doing it through a survival mechanism? Because when you're doing it to survive, all intelligence, all conscious, in the moment choice seems to disappear,
right,
and you become a slave to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important to define for our viewers, look, again, the word responsibility, the ability to respond to life, not to react
yeah,
to life. And that goes to our state of mind, our spiritual state of being. And I think for you in this conversation, what is it that you think you would give up if this was, because from what we talked about, this is a recent happening for you,
Mm-hmm.
parting ways with this gentleman. What do you think? What do you see happening if this gentleman actually, ends up moving out and now you're on your own? What do you think you're going to feel? What do you think you're going to think? And what are you going to do about it when those things come up?
That's coming back to the vampire thing. I can think cognitively about what I think that means until I've lived it. There are going to be things that pop up that I have never experienced. I know that. And we talked about, that spot where the fan stops spinning in one direction, comes to a complete standstill. That's the most useless place for a fan at a complete standstill, right? The fan has an imperative to move.
Maybe, but the fan has two speeds and it can't go. It has two directions. It can't go both directions at the same time.
It can't go both at the same time.
So without that stop, it's actually, it might be perceived as useless, but I think it's absolutely one of the most useful thing a fan has in that aspect. But I understand where you're coming from. But I think not enough credit is given to the non-movement of the fan as it switches gears.
It ultimately is the most important part. You'd played that one recording for me about that exhaustion that you hit in those times between becoming. And leading up to that point where I ended the relationship, because I have a very busy life. I physically, and for no explanation in the physical world, I physically couldn't move. I was paralyzed in a sense. I could do the bare minimum. I could feed my animals. I could make it to a meeting, and I could stare at a ceiling. That's all I could do for 2 days. And I remember sitting there thinking, when am I going to get past this? Because I'm losing time. I'm losing opportunity here. I've got to be getting stuff done. I can't do it. I need this phase to pass.
When you say, when am I going to get past this, is that time that you're talking about, is that a combination of it being the right season and then you taking the right action? Because I've been paralyzed in my recovery sometime, knowing exactly what's happening to me, but I also knew that it couldn't be any different right now. I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I feel like I knew it as soon as I finally not only came to the decision, but got the courage to take the action. And then immediately after hearing what you played for me, I realized that I hadn't just lost 2 days staring at a ceiling. That was perhaps the greatest investment of my life.
Correct. Which is the stopping of the fan.
But you don't know it at the time.
Correct. Until someone points it out to you, I think this is why the seeking of spiritual wisdom is so important, because our head knowledge can only take us so far. We need an injection of spiritual insight and spiritual intelligence and spiritual maturity to break through to the next level of heart understanding and soul acceptance, because we are creatures that get moved. This is why we go to the movies. We want to be moved. This is why actors get paid the type of money that they get paid, because me sitting in the audience, I don't feel anything until I see the actor feeling something. This is why computers can never take over what an actor does, because the human emotion, especially when it's mixed emotion,
Right.
like sacred exhaustion. You know what I mean? When someone says I'm exhausted, there's a negative aspect to that statement, but it doesn't have to be. We don't have to label things as negative and positive, because sometimes exhaustion is a sacred place to be when you're looking
Yes.
for change.
Yes.
A lot of paradoxes here in the spiritual realm.
Yeah, I think everything ultimately does land in a paradox because, like we were talking about before, we learn to speak in terms of opposites, and that turns into measurements of good and bad. But everything, it's the snake eating its tail. Everything there are spectrums, and you can have two things that are complete opposites, but you're going to move up and down along that polarity your whole life. And good and bad becomes so contextual if it's even something that can be labeled good or bad. It ultimately just becomes part of a journey.
Yeah, part of that speech was I picked up little bits and pieces, but the compost of confusion. When you think about what compost actually is, it's decayed matter.
Yeah.
But that decayed matter is also the very thing that fertilizes a new beginning.
Right.
So most people, when they're in a place of confusion, they automatically will categorize that as nothing is happening, when in reality, it's the fan coming to a stop.
Yeah.
And then reversing patterns. So I think what you and I are both saying is that we have to not only embrace, but we also have to celebrate the struggle.
Absolutely. Yeah, the struggle is, that's the test of your character right there, is struggling through it at all, rather than avoiding it and continually going into that reciprocal narrowing until it's just you and the substance keeping you at bay.
So how do you see this playing out for you?
That's such a broad question.
How do you let me narrow the question down. The thing about recovery that I think most people that are not in recovery don't understand is what a prolific experience it is to watch yourself grow up in public as an adult.
That is a prolific experience. One of the things that I've loved the most is, when I finally got to a point where I said, all right, I'm going to try rehab. At that point in my life, up until that point, it had never occurred to me that the problem was addiction. And at the point that I went to rehab, I thought, okay, the problem is physical addiction. I need to physically be detoxed, and then I will physically return to the world and continue on, less this problem. And that was where the whole bottom was pulled out. And I had to get into not trying to change the things around me, but trying to change the processes within me that were maybe survival mechanisms or bad habits, whatever they were. Ultimately, we group that as a spiritual malady. The problem was a spiritual malady, and the solution for me at the time was substance to numb the pain of that. And I threw myself in as hard as I did because, like I talked about, I made God small so I could get God out of the picture.
Make it palatable.
Right? Then I committed to this atheistic approach to life. And then I was able to, if there's no God, no higher order, there is therefore no objective moral code. Therefore, it's up to me to make mine and stick to mine. Therefore. And then we end up in a spot where I'm following my own rules, and my own rules aren't working. But my most fundamental narratives are supporting what I'm doing, and so I'm just in this pattern. And I came out of rehab with, I had such a phenomenally spiritual experience in there. And it was in one of those fan stopped moments. I couldn't, again, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I was so physically exhausted for no physical reason that I couldn't do anything. And I remember this sense suddenly of direct, intense divine connection. And I remember kind of not seeing, but seeing in my mind the different religious symbols morphing from one to the next to the next to the next, and starting to see things through the structure of mythology. And every story we've told throughout time, they're all parallel figures showing parallel stories. And it came to me both in an instant and in a time that felt like eternity. And I remember at that point thinking, I wish there was a way I could communicate this, because I've figured something out right now and I'm looking for the word. And I was looking for that word for a long time. And it really was a divine comedy for me, that moment where I was like, oh my God, the word I'm looking for is God. This is what God is. This is undeniable at this size. The size I made him, the little story, the old man with the beard who wants to punish me and is setting me up, that was easy to dismiss. But this feeling right here is the most hyper real thing I've ever experienced in my life, more real than anything in the physical world. So when I had that spiritual connection and finally identified it as what we call God, and then was taught in rehab how to continue to connect with that, I came out and threw myself into the program with a veracity, because I was not going to let that go, because I was not going back to where I came from. And I could never not have this feeling that I'd had in the spiritual space. And so I work the program to the extent that I do now, because that's the only thing that keeps me divinely connected at this point. And that's the only thing that's going to keep me from falling back in. But to bring that full circle, those things that I wanted to change, those things that I wanted to get rid of, I had a laundry list of stuff that I didn't like about myself that were 10-year problems that I was going to deal with the next morning. Most of them, and I hear this in the rooms, God doesn't deal with problems, he removes them. Most of them immediately evaporated. Not all of them, but most of them. So then my list turned into a few big things, one of them being a relationship I couldn't disentangle from, things like that, things that actually became a to-do list that was achievable. And
why do you think those things disappeared?
I think they were all just different numbing agents for me. And I needed a lot.
And when the real thing came in, they were not needed anymore. I didn't need those anymore. Yeah. I don't think, I think for me personally, I've had a very similar experience, and some people call it an awakening, some people call it enlightenment, you can call it whatever you want, but I stopped trying to introduce people to it. In fact, what I do as a professional recovery coach is, it's not for me to explain to you what that peach tastes like. My job as a coach is to get the obstacles out of the way so you can find your own fruit. You might not like a peach. You might be an apple guy. You know what I mean? You might be a nectarine guy. I don't know, because we all experience and taste God in a different way.
Right.
So I stopped trying a long time ago to try to convince people that there is a God, or that there is a source. How can you deny that there's a creator? All you got to do is look around and see creation.
Right.
Why things happen the way they happen, and these planets floating in the middle of space being a thing where you can go in any direction and there's no end to it. It's like there has to be a creator, because there's this beautiful creation. And I know that human beings could have never come up with anything like this. It's beyond our, so that for me takes care of the argument of whether there's a God or a creator or a higher power. But I think specifically for addicts and alcoholics, I think we are people that are extremely sensitive and thirsty for a reunion with that power greater than ourselves. we're super, super, super spiritual people, and that's why we suffer so much when we don't live that way. And then, we're in such extreme pain spiritually, and that's why they call it pain pills. We take them so we don't feel the pain of not being able to find the road, because we are human beings, and there does need to be, yes, we do live as humans on this planet, and that has its place, but we're also spiritual beings having a human experience on this planet, and that doesn't get talked about at all. Right. Nothing ever, not in school, not in families. The closest we come to it is pushing religion on our kids. And I'm not against or for religion in any way, shape, or form. It has its uses, but I think it was developed for it to be an introduction to the spiritual world,
right,
not the end-all, be-all.
And I think that's a place where religion went off course, is when it became the end-all, be-all. Like, you weren't supposed to look past what you were being told in the pulpit, and this is how it was, you take your dose, you go home. I don't think you're ever supposed to stop searching and more delicately finding the shape of that spiritual thing you're chasing.
And it's for each individual. It does bring some solace. I will give religion that. There are people that are religious, and because religion basically asks you to come to a conclusion.
Right.
That's why they're called believers. You can't believe something that you know. You can only believe something that you don't know. That's why it's called a belief. So it asks you to come to a conclusion, and conclusion to me is the equivalent of death. What is the conclusion of your life? In my life, it's death. So for some people, that's fine. They find some solace in their life. They live within a small sphere. They're happy, and that's wonderful if that's what you have. But if you're someone like me who can't come to a conclusion because there is this machine, this motor inside of me that's continuously wants to seek and wants to push boundaries, that's why people overdose. They push boundaries. When they take drugs, they're looking to get high. That's why we call it getting high. I don't like where I'm at. It's not enough. I need to expand. I want to get high. And yes, you can achieve it through chemicals taken in from the outside, but it's a poor substitute when you can just tap into the source of creation.
Absolutely.
Through some simple practices, through one of the biggest practices that the 12-step programs push constantly is service. Service. The best way to get out of yourself is to get into someone else and help someone else. Because for me, the program didn't come alive until I was of service to another human being.
Yeah, it's service to me. It's just one more nod to the spiritual element. I mean, once you can get to this point where you say, okay, there is one ultimate all, then every other person there is a part of that too. They're you, you're them, you're all connected to this overpowering thing that's both outside of and within you in everything. It's the DNA of life itself. But when you get into service with other people, and it's what religion does too, it pulls you into community. A lot of mythology, it talks about how that hero has somehow separated from community, and the job is going through the underworld to find his way back and bring value back to the community.
Community, correct.
When there is something of a becoming nothing when you're no longer integrated in community, which is what we all do. Everyone I hear in the room in the end was isolating. I was isolating like crazy. That was my favorite thing to do in the end.
And there's a difference between isolating and being alone, right? Like community, this is another one of those paradoxes. Like, it's so important to spend time alone with yourself, to do your own work, but at the same time to be part of a community. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
They coexist. Yeah, they coexist.
They say, the mystics, they go out into the wilderness to deeply connect with something, but then they bring back what they've pulled from the underworld.
Correct.
Those magic beans, whatever it is, whatever epiphany you have, whatever deeper understanding of the world you find on your own in the mud, you pull back up to the surface and you share the boon. That's the whole cycle, and you never stop, and it becomes this upward spiral. That's Jacob's ladder.
100%. And also to that point, when you come back to the crowd to share what you have found individually, you will find things also in the crowd.
Yeah.
It's not that you're just bringing stuff to the crowd, but
You're exchanging.
You're exchanging. The source of creation is bountiful, and it doesn't pick and choose where it releases its bounty.
Absolutely.
Me, as a person with over 31 years clean, oftentimes, it's happened a number of times, I go to meetings and a newcomer will say something that'll blow my socks off. So we are hunter. Simultaneously, we are prey, we are liars and we are truthful. We're human beings. We've been everything. We've all, in our DNA, we've been murdered. We've been loved and we've been cheated on. And there's just this just gigantic dynamic pull and push, tug of war happening spiritually. And I wish that it never, ever, ever changes. Because I don't want to go through this life playing it safe.
No, absolutely. And I think that, coming back to that, we want something to submit to. When you put yourself in an arena with something more powerful than yourself, that creates, if it's the right amount of difference between you two, it creates that zone of proximal development that forces you to grow. And if we're not expanding, we're shrinking. There's no stasis. That doesn't exist. Too many things are moving at once. And I think that's, why in the past I'd find things to submit to that were not God, because I refused to look at God. And that's why I would get so tied up in them. And when I got something powerful enough, it put me in enough places of conflict that I had to grow enough that it kept me interested. Until it didn't.
Because it challenged your core beliefs.
Yeah.
Because it was showing you that your core beliefs aren't working.
Yeah, but
Something
it was
is faulty.
an exhaustible well, and you have to find the inexhaustible well. And that's what spirituality ultimately is. Everything else has a hard bottom that you're going to find.
Yeah, unfortunately, you don't find that until you're exhausted.
Exactly, yeah.
You got to run out of gas before you find the gas station.
Right.
So now I want to pivot into, see, if I saw you on the street, and I didn't know you, I wouldn't know that all this is going on within you, right? You would just be another woman that I saw on the street, but the complexity of what's happening inside of you is absolutely just phenomenally intricate, and it makes you such a multifaceted human being, someone that I could sit and have a conversation with. Now, let's take the same person before you've had the many awakenings that you've had so far. Mm-hmm. Let's take you back. I want to talk about what parents and what spouses and siblings don't seem to understand. You have a complicated person, an addict in your family, who is obviously struggling with life, because that's the struggle.
Yeah.
You're swimming upstream against life. The thing that I surrender to life.
Yeah.
I surrender to life because what I know about life is that it's going to do what it's going to do. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what I think, what I like, what I don't like. I'm not even on the... It doesn't consider anything that I want personally. Life is in session, and all of creation runs life the way it wants to. So for me, when I look at a family that has a screwed up kid that is doing all the wrong things in life and refuses to change, the reason for that refusal to change is because all of the wrong things that they're doing, they feel none of the consequences for it, because we have a group of parents behind them that are fitting the bill for that life that's not working for them. So when you fit the bill for someone who isn't doing the right things, who isn't suiting up and showing up, who isn't self-supporting, who isn't searching for any type of spirituality, who doesn't pay for anything, and you reward that behavior because you've lowered the standard of what it is to be a human being to a point where the lower you set your standards for your addict, the lower they will behave. Mm-hmm. Because they're mimicking your tolerance. They
Yeah.
will put out what you directly tolerate or don't tolerate. And instead of raising the stakes on them, you're lowering the stakes on them because they can't do 5. So let's see if they can do 4. Well, they can't do 4. Let's see if they can do 2. And then pretty soon you got a person who does absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
You have people living at home that contribute to nothing and have all of their needs met and run the house like a tyrant. And I look at these parents and I say, listen, you're the problem.
Yeah.
You're the problem for what you're the problem for. I'm not saying you're the entire problem, but what I'm saying is until you change what you need to change about yourself, how dare you ask them to make changes that they need to make for themselves? It's not fair. It's just not fair. And so when I get called in to be hired as a professional private recovery coach, I have to kind of close my eyes and listen to the family dynamic that sits before me, listen to what's coming out of the kid or the spouse. I know what comes out of addicts that are using. It's all bullshit, but that's okay. That's where they're at. And then I hear the non-addicts and the bullshit that comes out of them, their supporting cast. And I think to myself, this is one big pile of shit that needs to be sorted out. And what I need from both parties is cooperation. Now, I'm less likely to get it from the addict because what we're asking him or her to give up is a phenomenal situation from where they sit, where they don't get to do shit, but they get everything handed to them. The easiest thing, the easiest party to change would be the people that are getting the raw end of the deal, that give everything and get nothing in return, instead of asking a guy that gets everything and gives nothing in return. So it's like, I talk to the parents, and what's phenomenal about this dynamic is that, yes, the addict might not be ready to make any changes because they don't understand failure because they're so fucking well compensated for their failures. They don't truly ever understand what it means to fail. So I look at the family and I say, look, there are things that you can do to make his or her life less comfortable, because I know that comfortable addicts don't change. People that are comfortable don't fucking change. So if you pull certain things that you're providing for this person, what'll happen is they'll get uncomfortable. When they get uncomfortable enough, their ears will go up like fucking German shepherds and will have their attention, even if it's just for a moment, because at that moment I can plant 1 or 2 seeds that might hatch right there on the spot, or they might sit like bacteria and grow over a period of time, because what we have to do is awaken these people spiritually, but we also have to awaken parents. And I know what parents are afraid of. They're afraid of their loved ones dying. But can you call this living? Can you call this living? And let's say that they do die. Don't you want to, as a parent or a supporting cast, don't you want to be able to look in the fucking mirror and say, I did everything that I could? Because sometimes even if you do everything that you can, people still die. Somebody's got to die from addiction. I don't know whose parent or whose child or whose spouse it's going to be, but that's not your business as a supporting cast member of an addict. Your business is to make sure you do everything that you're supposed to do. That's not the same thing as doing the same thing over and over again. That's not the same thing. Comfortable addicts and alcoholics do not recover. Stop lowering the bar. It is only through responsibility, ownership. We have to push them. We can't continue to make their landings. We got to let these kids and these people really feel the consequences of their decision makings, because as you so eloquently put it, you couldn't become exhausted until you felt the ramifications of your belief systems and the things that you put into play. That's what exhaustion is. But in an addict's life, they do what they want to do and the family members take the exhaustion. That simply is not going to work. It won't work.
It doesn't work. And the longer you let that system of comfort play out, I mean, from the outside, it looks like the addict's in a place of comfort, but I can tell you from experience that's literal hell. That place of living tied to this addiction that you don't want, feeling like, because you've got your narratives. Your narratives are wrong. You're not questioning them, but they're playing in your head, and it's a hellish narrative. And that's where I was at the end. No one can be trusted. Everything's like, I was legitimately worried the world was just going to spin off its axis into space and we were all going to implode. Like, things were so out of control that I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the other shoe was Armageddon. That is hell. I dreaded waking up, but I couldn't fall asleep. I only wanted to be asleep, but I couldn't get there. I was exhausted all day, so I was numbing with substance.
And you're in survival mode the whole time.
You're in survival mode.
You can't be conscious in that type of state.
And the feedback you're getting from the world is telling you that it's the very hell you're experiencing. So your narratives aren't changing. It was only when I got to a point. Exactly, they're being reinforced. And that is daily hell. And anyone confirming to me what I believed was a devil, because I couldn't live that way any longer. And it was only at the point where I burned through my own comfort, burned through everything, that it was enough of a fundamental shake that I started backing up from this box to this box to this, and you start backing up your perspectives until you realize which giant perspective is the narrative that's been off the whole time. For me, that was God. And I think that's ultimately everyone's giant perspective that's off if they're living in hell, is that spiritual disconnection. But then once I was able to shift that narrative into place, all these smaller ones immediately fell into line also. And it stopped being everyone's out to get me. I just got to somehow get through life because I can't kill myself, because that would, I have a daughter, and there was a point where I was like, okay, what's the right age for her mother to commit suicide?
What's the least harmful way I can do this?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Like, how can I just get out of the situation that is life and not cause more damage? But there is no way. There's no way off the ride. You got to learn to reframe the way you're experiencing the ride.
Yeah, and you can't even begin to question these things as an addict until you're forced to get out of your comfort zone and get out there and struggle and strive and meet new people. Pink Floyd has a great song called Comfortably Numb, and that's what we're talking about with addicts. Yes, everything's provided for them and you think that they would be happy, but they're miserable because everything is provided for them. And one of the verses in that song says, "Did you exchange your walk-on part in the war for the lead role in a cage?" And so what that means to me is that if you back off and you let this addict struggle, he'll take his role, his walk-on part in the war. He'll take that war up. He'll grab his weapons and he'll participate in the war that he has to participate in. Because if you don't let him do that, he'll take the lead role in a cage. That's all there is. There's no ifs and buts about it. There's no two other ways. The only path that the addict has is to be abandoned so that he can find his tribe, her tribe, and the set of people. This is the biggest thing that I deal with as a recovery coach. It's not about taking you just to meetings. Look, people can go to rehab, they get detoxed, they get rehabbed. In the rehab, some rehabs, if they're good rehabs, they'll spend some time with the family educating them. But they're just getting information. They don't play it out when they get home. Oh, I just got home from rehab. Your room's a mess. Listen, don't tell him to clean his room. He just got out of rehab. We don't want to shake him. So you won't even implement the most simplest things that will relate to you as family members because you're in survival mode.
Right.
You're in fear. You're in survival mode. That survival mode is the same survival mode that you and I are in as it pertains to our personal stuff. So consciously responding to life. I hope that today when we're done shooting this, I hope that you leave here having heard yourself say with clarity, the intelligence that you have shared with us, I believe that something will happen for you today where you'll get clarity on your own life based on this conversation, and you will have the courage to do what you need to do, what you know in your bones is the right thing to do, and put it behind you, and then look for the next thing that needs to be slain. There's a calm that I see in you right now, Kimberly. There's a grace in your eyes. There's an intelligence. There is a living, breathing creator inside of you that wants the human aspect of you to have a greater, more profound experience while you're on this planet. And I really want you to, because I see you as a leader. I see you as someone who can have that spiritual breakthrough, and then to be able to with grace carry the message of what recovery is really about to other people in the programs. And where at one time maybe you came in looking to belong, now with your new understanding and your new way of living life, people will be attracted and will want to belong to you.
That's the magnetism there. I do feel like there's that, we have the triangle that we see in all places, or like Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There's always the three, right?
Pyramids.
Yeah. It's body, mind, spirit. And the same way the body will die from lack of certain tension with the world in the form of activity and exercise. I think we know it's the same mentally. It must necessarily be the same spiritually. And I think that's where we end up when we end up in that complacency and that comfort, is that necessary tension that particular element of the body has to be in some kind of constant relationship with. It gets paralyzed, and it will wither if it doesn't get forced back out into that space of tension. It's a bit of an inoculation to have a little bit of the poison that will kill you. And I do think that ultimately, the same way those few days where I felt like I was in the underworld and couldn't move, and I was worried about the time I was losing, and then realized it was the best use of my time that I've spent with 2 days in probably the last decade. I think that's going to keep happening on different levels, on that coil that goes up and up and
100%.
up and up.
I mean, you did in one afternoon what you couldn't do in 5 years, and it was easy.
13.
It was easy because the time had come.
Yeah.
There's nothing greater, there's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come.
Yes.
And that's why we stay clean. That's why we stay sober through the rough times, because it is just past those rough times, those storms, that the sunshine awaits, and we don't quit. We don't, I'm a part of the no matter what club. I, like you, have wanted to blow my brains out at 19 years clean, but I wasn't going to use.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to use. I have finally found my path. And it is the most gratifying thing that I have ever been able to put my hands on, and I'm not alone anymore. I feel complete, and in that completion, I see people who are locked up in the rooms of recovery. And yes, they have sponsors. Yes, they have the program, but they still don't have the pieces put together.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think if I can boast a little bit about what I do, I think I see where people are locked up, and I'm able to connect the dots for them. And I think that's where my value as a coach comes in, because I can have a 10-minute conversation with someone and know exactly where they're at, and be able to understand where their misconceptions are, where some of their assumptions have been made that are not serving them well. And I'm able to one of my clients, Mark, gave me the greatest compliment. He said, "You are like a spiritual locksmith.
Mm-hmm.
You unlock people." And I think that is a gift that I've worked very hard on sharpening and perfecting, and I'm still learning. I will always be learning, but I love what I do.
Yeah.
I love this topic. I could talk about it forever, especially when I have intelligent and honest people like yourself. You're not afraid to show us where you're struggling. You're also not afraid to talk about where you've had some gains and some breakthroughs. And I think the yin and yang of it is what makes human beings so fascinating.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this, as it pertains to your daughter. What's your daughter's name?
That one I don't put out there.
Okay, so I want you to look into the camera and tell your daughter what you think about her and what she means to you. I want you to make her a promise that you're going to do everything that you can to make sure that she has the best mother in the world. You're going to make the best decisions possible, keeping her in mind, because I know you die for your daughter.
I would die for
that
my
much
daughter.
I do know.
Yes.
And I apologize for asking you her name.
It's okay.
But I just, let's say 30 years from now, God forbid, you're not here, and your daughter runs across this interview.
You're going to make sure she gets it, right?
No, you're going to make sure she gets it. It's
Okay,
your daughter.
all right.
I don't interfere.
Well, if I'm not here
I'll make
in
sure she
30
gets
years, you're going to make sure
it.
she gets it.
I will.
Okay.
But I want you to look into the camera like she's right there. And I don't want you to speak to her in the third person. I want you to look at her and tell her what she's meant to you. Tell her what your plans are for the future and for yourself and for her.
Okay. Honey, you're the thing that all my minutes end up going toward at the end of the day. I'm hoping that I have learned enough that I can pass on to you in a way that you can take in, that you won't have to learn it the way I learned it, and I hope that you'll take it and you'll go much farther than I ever did. There is nothing I love more, nothing I think about more. There is no one I'd do more for than you. And I can see in you so much potential and so much sweetness. And I can't wait to see who you're going to become, but I know I'm always going to be there to make sure that you're following that and not something else.
I think that's beautiful. I want to thank our audience. We have just filmed another episode of the Interfere podcast with my good friend and former client, Kimberly. I have so much respect and admiration for you. You are a human being in the full spectrum of what it means to be a human being. I think you're a lot more courageous than even you understand. I think you have untapped power, strength, willingness, and truth that you have yet to tap into. And I'm just going to stand by and just watch you grow and root for you. Thank you, Kimberly.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's Interfere with me, Eric Evans. I hope that the information has been helpful for you. I know that it makes me feel wonderful to share it with you because we have lives at stake here. So please, if you liked it, if you enjoyed the information, and if you want more, please click on the like, subscribe, share it with your friends, share it with your family. I want to keep it coming because we got a lot of work to do.